The pavement dug into my back, and the local grappling champion was whispering threats through a smug smile, fully believing he had won. He thought I was just the quiet, middle-aged guy from 42B. He had absolutely no idea I'd spent the last decade teaching Navy SEALs how to survive. To understand how a suburban driveway transformed into a tactical combat zone, you have to understand the sanctuary I was trying to build. My name is Jack Reynolds. For 14 years, my office was a windowless, concrete-walled facility in Virginia Beach, interspersed with extended, undisclosed trips to places where the sand is hot and the local populace would rather you didn't exist. I was an independent defense contractor and a close-quarters battle instructor. My primary clients were Tier 1 operators, specifically the men of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I didn't teach them how to shoot. They already knew that. I taught them how to survive when the rifle jammed, the room went pitch black, and the distance between them and a hostile was reduced to 0. I taught the brutal, untelevised science of hand-to-hand termination. When I retired at 46, I had enough savings, enough phantom adrenaline, and enough ghosts to last 3 lifetimes. I bought a single-story ranch house in Oak Ridge Estates, a quiet, aggressively mundane neighborhood in Northern Virginia. I wanted the silence. I wanted to wake up, water my hydrangeas, drink dark roast coffee on my porch, and never have to assess another human being's threat level for the rest of my natural life. For the first 8 months, it was paradise. I was the boring guy at the end of the cul-de-sac. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Accord, wore faded flannel shirts, and kept my hair buzzed short purely out of habit. To the rest of the world, I was just an aging accountant or a mid-level manager nursing a bad back. Then Derek Wallace moved in next door. Derek was 32, fueled by pre-workout supplements, new money, and an ego that entered a room a full minute before he did. He drove a matte black, lifted Ford F250 with tires that belonged on a piece of agricultural machinery, and he made sure everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew when he was coming or going. But the truck wasn't his defining characteristic. His defining characteristic was his newly minted black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Derek trained at a highly publicized local facility called Apex Striking and Grappling. It was run by a guy named Ray Mitchell, a legitimate former regional MMA champion who had built a lucrative business training local businessmen and amateur fighters. Derek was Ray's star pupil, a fact Derek made sure to broadcast to anyone within earshot. He wore tight, moisture-wicking shirts emblazoned with the gym's logo. He rolled on the neighborhood lawns. He spoke in a bizarre vernacular of sweeps, submissions, and guard passes. I noticed the shift in the neighborhood's dynamic almost immediately. Suburban ecosystems are fragile, relying on unspoken rules of mutual respect and non-interference. Derek shattered that. He was a bully who had found a socially acceptable vehicle, martial arts, to justify his aggressive nature. He started small, parking his massive truck so it partially blocked his neighbors' driveways, playing bass-heavy music in his open garage until 2 in the morning. When confronted, he didn't apologize. He intimidated. I watched from my kitchen window one Tuesday evening as he backed down Henry, a 68-year-old retired postal worker who lived across the street. Henry had politely asked Derek to move his guest's car, which was parked on Henry's sprinkler head. Derek had puffed out his chest, closed the distance to within inches of Henry's face, and used a low, menacing tone to send the old man shuffling back into his house. I watched Derek's body language. I watched the way he distributed his weight, the way his chin jutted out, the subtle flare of his lats. In my former life, analyzing an opponent's physical mechanics was the difference between walking away and being carried out in a bag. Derek was strong, undoubtedly fast and conditioned, but he was also arrogant, emotionally undisciplined, and profoundly untested outside the padded walls of a gymnasium. I decided to remain the gray man. I'd spent over a decade swimming in violence. I had no desire to dip my toes into a neighborhood squabble. When Derek would stare me down as I checked my mail, hoping for a reaction, I gave him a mild, slightly awkward wave and retreated inside. He interpreted my lack of aggression as fear. He mistook my silence for submission. And in the mind of a bully, submission is an invitation to push harder. He had no idea that the quiet neighbor he was sizing up wasn't avoiding a fight out of cowardice, but out of a deeply ingrained, almost mechanical restraint. I wasn't scared of Derek Wallace. I was actively managing the ingrained tactical conditioning that viewed his aggressive posturing as a lethal threat. The friction turned from ambient to direct on a sweltering Saturday in July. I was in my backyard, tending to a row of raised vegetable beds when I heard the unmistakable crash of shattering glass, followed by raucous laughter. I stood up and walked to the 4-foot chain-link fence separating my property from Derek's. He was hosting a barbecue. About a dozen men, mostly built like brick outhouses and sporting cauliflower ears, were drinking heavily on his patio. One of them had thrown an empty beer bottle, intentionally or not, over the fence. It had smashed directly onto my patio stones, sending shards of amber glass across the area where my golden retriever mix usually napped. I grabbed a broom and dustpan, walked over to the glass, and began sweeping it up. I didn't say a word. I didn't glare. I just cleaned up the mess. "Hey, look at the neighborhood watch doing his chores." A voice boomed over the fence. I looked up. Derek was leaning over the top rail, a beer in one hand, a pair of tongs in the other. Two of his gym buddies, I later learned their names were Kyle and Nathan, were flanking him, snickering. "Afternoon, Derek," I said mildly, dumping the glass into my outdoor trash can. "Just cleaning up this glass. Don't want the dog stepping on it." "Yeah, well, wind caught it, old man," Derek said, though there was zero wind. He took a sip of his beer, his eyes locking onto mine, waiting for a challenge. "You got a problem with us having a little fun?" "No problem at all," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly modulated. "In the military, we call this tactical de-escalation. You deny the aggressor the emotional friction they are desperately seeking. Just keeping the yard safe. Enjoy your barbecue." I turned my back on him. To a predator, turning your back is a sign of prey. I heard the scrape of a boot on the chain-link fence. "Hey, I'm talking to you, buddy," Derek snapped, his tone shifting from mocking to hostile. "I didn't say you were dismissed." I stopped. I took a slow, measured breath. The phantom adrenaline, the cold, metallic taste I hadn't experienced since a particularly bloody training exercise in 2018 with Master Chief Thomas Wright, flooded the back of my throat. I suppressed it. I turned back around, keeping my hands open and visible at my sides. I said, "Have a good barbecue, Derek. We're good here, are we?" Derek sneered. He vaulted the low fence with an athletic ease that I noted for future reference. He landed on my grass and closed the distance, stopping uncomfortably close. He was 3 inches taller than me and probably outweighed me by 40 pounds of pure muscle. He smelled of cheap beer and expensive cologne. "Let me explain how things work around here, Jack," Derek said, jabbing a thick finger into my chest. The physical contact sent a shockwave through my nervous system. Every fiber of my training screamed at me to trap the arm, shatter the elbow, and drive my palm through his nose. I forced my muscles to remain relaxed. I let him push me slightly off balance. "You and these other soft suburbanites," Derek continued. "You think you own this street because you've been here longer. I don't play by HOA rules. I'm the reigning state absolute division champion. I snap limbs for a hobby. So if a bottle breaks in your yard, you sweep it up and you keep your mouth shut. Understand?" I looked at him. I didn't look at his eyes. I looked at his center mass, my peripheral vision tracking the location of Kyle and Nathan, who were now leaning over the fence, watching like spectators at a gladiator pit. "I understand," I said quietly. Derek smirked, a look of utter contempt washing over his face. "Good boy." He turned and hopped back over the fence, high-fiving Kyle. I walked back inside my house, locked the door, and sat in the dark living room for a full hour, waiting for my heart rate to drop back to a resting baseline. From that day on, I was Derek's favorite target. The harassment became systematic. He would deliberately blow his grass clippings onto my driveway. He would let his aggressive Doberman roam off-leash onto my property, laughing when the dog cornered me by my car. He would have his friends park their cars so tight against my driveway that I had to drive over my own lawn to get to work. I documented everything. I installed discreet security cameras. I called the local police precinct and spoke with an officer named Brian Davis. Davis was sympathetic but dismissive. "It's a civil matter, Mr. Reynolds," he told me over the phone. "Unless he physically assaults you or causes significant property damage, our hands are tied. These alpha male types usually get bored if you ignore them." But Derek wasn't getting bored. The lack of resistance was infuriating him. In his world, the MMA gym, there was a hierarchy built on physical dominance. If you tapped out, you submitted, and the fight was over. But in the real world, my refusal to engage was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a perceived insult to his authority. He needed to break me publicly to validate his own self-worth. He didn't realize that in my world, there is no tapping out. There are no referees, no weight classes, and no rules. There is only survival. I was treating him like a civilian, behaving badly. He was desperately trying to turn himself into an enemy combatant. And on a humid Friday evening in late August, he finally succeeded. It was just past 7 p.m. The oppressive Virginia heat had finally broken, leaving behind a thick, sticky twilight. I had just returned from the hardware store and was unloading heavy bags of topsoil from the trunk of my Honda. My driveway is long, bordered by thick, high hedges on one side and my garage on the other, creating a natural choke point. I was hauling the third bag out of the trunk when I heard the crunch of gravel. I turned. Blocking the end of my driveway was Derek's matte black F250. It was parked parallel, completely cutting off my exit to the street. Derek stepped out of the driver's side. From the passenger side emerged Kyle, and from the back seat, Nathan. They were all wearing tight gym apparel, their faces flushed, their voices loud. They'd clearly come from a long session at Apex Striking, likely followed by a few drinks. "Well, well, well," Derek called out, his voice echoing off the brick facade of my house. "Look who's doing yard work on a Friday night. You got a hot date with a tomato plant, Jack." I slowly lowered the 40-pound bag of soil to the pavement. I closed the trunk of my car. I stood up straight. The tactical computer in my brain, dormant for over a year, booted up with terrifying speed. Threats. 3. Primary threat. Center, Derek. Secondary threats. Flanking, Kyle and Nathan. Environment, confined. Escape routes, blocked. Improvised weapons, none accessible in time. "Derek," I said, my voice projecting clearly, but without aggression. "You're blocking my driveway." Derek laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He began walking up the driveway toward me. Kyle and Nathan followed, fanning out slightly. They were executing a rudimentary tactical envelopment, probably without even realizing it. It's a natural predator instinct to surround prey. "My truck broke down," Derek lied, grinning. "Must be the transmission. Might take a few hours to fix. You got nowhere to be anyway, right, old man?" "Move the truck, please," I said. They kept walking. 10 yards, 8 yards. "You know, Jack, I've been thinking," Derek said, casually cracking his knuckles. "You're real disrespectful. You think you're better than us? You think because you keep your mouth shut, you're some kind of tough guy?" "I don't want any trouble, Derek. I'm just asking you to respect my property." I took a half step backward, my back lightly touching the side of my car. I was feigning retreat, giving them the illusion of control while actually establishing a solid base, securing my rear flank so no one could get behind me. 5 yards. See? That's the thing, Derek said, his eyes narrowing. The faux joviality dropped, replaced by cold malice. Respect is earned, and you haven't earned any. You disrespect me. You disrespect my gym. My boys here think you need a lesson in neighborhood etiquette. Kyle snickered from the left. Yeah, teach him how to sweep, D. 3 yards. They entered what we in the military call the kill zone, the distance within which an average person can close the gap and strike before you can react. Derek, stop right there, I said. This was the verbal warning, the final checkpoint before violence becomes legally and morally justifiable. Do not come any closer. Derek laughed. He stepped into my personal space, his chest almost touching mine. I could smell the stale sweat and the sour tang of alcohol on his breath. I didn't look at his face. I was looking at his collarbone, relying on peripheral vision to track his shoulders and hips. The body cannot strike without the shoulders or hips moving first. It is a biomechanical impossibility. Or what, Jack? Derek whispered, leaning in. What are you going to do? Call the cops? Call your HOA. He raised his right hand and shoved me hard in the chest. Most people tense up when shoved. They try to resist the force, which usually results in them losing their balance and falling backward. I didn't resist. I absorbed the kinetic energy, letting my upper body rock backward while my feet remained rooted in a bladed stance. The shove did exactly what I needed it to do. It gave me a split second to evaluate his power and his balance. He was strong, but his footing was terrible. He was leaning too far forward, relying entirely on his upper body strength. He was a grappler, used to fighting on flat, matted surfaces where losing your footing just means the fight goes to the ground. On concrete, against an opponent trained in lethal force, it's a fatal error. Look at him, Derek croaked, turning his head slightly to look back at Nathan. Didn't even try to stand his ground. Pathetic. That was his second mistake. He took his eyes off his opponent in a hostile environment. In my mind, the quiet suburban driveway vanished. The sounds of crickets and distant lawnmowers faded to zero. I was back in the kill house. I was back with the SEALs, running the drills until our knuckles bled and our muscles cramped. Neutralize the primary threat. Control the weapon limbs. Disrupt the central nervous system. All right, playtime's over, Derek said, turning his attention back to me. His eyes were wide with adrenaline. He reached out with both hands, aiming to grab the collar of my shirt. It was a classic judo or jujitsu clinch entry. He wanted to secure grips, control my posture, and drag me to the pavement where his black belt would guarantee him victory. He thought he was entering a sport fight. He didn't realize he had just initiated a war. As his hand shot forward, the time for de-escalation evaporated, and the heavily conditioned weapon I had buried beneath a year of gardening and quiet living finally woke up. In the sanitized environment of a mixed martial arts gym, a fight is a physical debate. It's a back-and-forth exchange of techniques governed by rules, weight classes, time limits, and a referee tasked with ensuring nobody sustains permanent damage. You concede when the pain or pressure becomes too much, signaled by a tap on the mat. In my previous profession, a fight is a catastrophic failure of situational awareness. It is a kinetic, asymmetric explosion of violence designed to neutralize a threat's central nervous system or structural integrity in a matter of seconds. There is no debate. There is only termination of the threat. As Derek Wallace's thick, calloused hands shot forward to grab the collar of my flannel shirt, his brain was processing a sport grappling sequence. He expected me to pull back, to raise my hands in a defensive shell, or perhaps to throw a wildly telegraphed amateur punch that he could easily duck under to secure his takedown. I did none of those things. In close quarters battle, the fundamental rule of unarmed engagement is simple. Get off the X and destroy the opponent's sensory processors. The X is the direct line of attack. Instead of stepping back, which would only keep me on the X and allow Derek to continue his forward momentum, I stepped diagonally to my left, dropping my center of gravity. My right foot pivoted on the concrete, blading my stance. I didn't try to block his hands. Blocking is a reactive movement that wastes precious milliseconds. Instead, I executed a double inside parry, swatting his forearms outward just enough to clear the center line. Because Derek had committed his weight forward for the grab, my sudden disappearance from his target zone caused him to stumble. His posture broke. His chin dropped. He was structurally compromised. Before his brain could register that he had missed his grip, I fired my right hand forward. I didn't throw a closed fist. Punching skulls bare-knuckled is a fantastic way to shatter the small bones in your hand. I drove the heel of my palm directly upward, striking the underside of his jaw with the rigid force of a hydraulic piston. The sound was a hollow, sickening crack that echoed off the brick wall of my garage. The human jaw acts as a lever connected directly to the vestibular system in the inner ear, which controls balance. A precise upward strike to the jawbone violently rotates the cranium, sending a shockwave through the cerebrospinal fluid and temporarily short-circuiting the brain. Derek's eyes instantly rolled back, showing only the whites. His legs turned to liquid. He didn't fall backward. He simply collapsed straight down, a 220-pound sack of dead weight, his knees slamming brutally onto the hard gravel and asphalt of my driveway. He landed in a heap at my feet, groaning, entirely detached from reality. The entire sequence took less than 1.5 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. The mocking grins vanished from the faces of Kyle and Nathan. The tactical geometry of the driveway had shifted violently. Their alpha male, the state champion who snapped limbs for fun, was twitching on the ground after a single, imperceptible movement from the quiet accountant in 42B. But a multiple attacker scenario doesn't end when the primary threat goes down. The human brain is a funny thing. When confronted with sudden, incomprehensible violence, it either triggers a freeze response or a hyper-aggressive fight response fueled by panic. Nathan chose panic. "What the hell did you do?" Nathan screamed, his face flushing crimson. He lowered his head and charged at me like a linebacker, his arms wide, looking to tackle me to the pavement. He was telegraphing his intentions from a mile away. I didn't retreat. I used Derek's unconscious body as a tactical obstacle.